Exploitation movies were a big thing in the 70s. There was blaxploitation, Nazi-sploitation, Aussie-sploitation for some reason, but more importantly, there was sexploitation. And a big subgenre within that were women in prison films. Now, Japan was not immune to this craze of watching female prison movies, and under the careful guidance of director Shunya Ito, created a series of prison movies that surpassed the exploitation genre into what some might call art, or maybe they're just cheesy 70s prison movies. The series is adapted from a manga, which has some fan translations out, none are really complete. It was made 2 years after the manga debuted, so it seems more like it took the general premise of the manga. Toei produced the movies. While known for such classics as Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, Scorpion was more on the edgy side than anything they had really done before, and arguably since. Basically, this would be like if Universal released a woman in prison movie. It wouldn't exactly be unbelievable, but it is kind of odd that such a big name company as Toei attached their name to this. The first 3 movies are directed by Shunya Ito, with the first 4 starring Meiko Kaji as the female prisoner. While this was Shunya's first time directing, Meiko had been in a few other movies before that, which included the Stray Cat Rock series, which is about bikers and women and stuff. So she was no stranger to the more exploitive side of Japanese cinema. So let's start with the first movie, Female Prisoner 701, Scorpion. This is the origin story, the classic, the exploitation movie that critics praise, but the overall plot is pretty by the numbers. You don't even need to have seen a lot of women in prison movies to have a general idea of how this is gonna go. Meiko Kaji's character, Nami, is set up by her boyfriend, takes the fall, and then seeks revenge, and that's the whole plot in a nutshell. Characters and plot aren't really what drive this film, or any of the films following for that matter, but it's the visual direction that makes it stand out. The way certain shots are lit, the way that they're set up, it makes what could have been a generic movie just a step ahead. Not only did this film set off a successful franchise, but it also launched the singing career of its lead actress, as she performed the opening theme. Her songs would also be featured in Tarantino's first Kill Bill movie, which completely revitalized her singing career. While this movie is a tad predictable, it's still good. It's worth watching for its influence and the neat visuals. The series would take a very different turn in its next film, which would be Jailhouse 41. From here, the series goes kind of Mad Max-ish, not in a post-apocalyptic way. Nami is now our observer. It's not so much her story as it is the women of Jailhouse 41. Nami and the 6 other inmates break out of prison early on in this movie. The main focus is on their escape. At this point, the movie stops being a prison movie altogether, and moves the furthest away from that premise the series ever went. Like the last movie, the highlight of this is its visuals, but this time they're what makes up most of the film. The world outside of the prison is almost empty, with certain scenes and characters existing solely for the audience. Shunya's visual touches are at their peak here, completely moving the series outside of the exploitation realm. This movie is as close to an art film as the series gets, and it is definitely a high point. The characters too are now a little bit more fleshed out, although nothing that goes beyond a sentence. Still, that, along with the surreal visuals, is actually a huge step forward for the series. Jailhouse 41 could have taken the easy route and just rehashed the first, but it took the series beyond the walls of the prison, and into our third film, The Beast Stable. definitely the darkest of the three, and that's saying something for two films with rape as a major plot point. It returns to a more grounded story, and while Shunya's visual flair is not absent, it's not in full swing like it was in Jailhouse. Naomi is introduced to a new prison, one of human trafficking, and while this is going on, she's pursued by a police officer with one arm. The movie is a lot slower than its predecessors, where Jailhouse 41 took about 20 minutes to develop things. Beast Stable takes around 40, and it doesn't even take off at that point. The kills, the chase, all of it is much more drawn out than the last two movies. For example, the previous two movies ended with Nami directly taking her revenge. In this one, she sets up her target to die in a much more convoluted way, which is interesting because that was never really her shtick. She was always the one that would go out and just stab and kill her own people. She wouldn't set them up to be killed by other persons. And while that's not necessarily bad, it does leave Shunya's trilogy ending more on a whimper than on a bang. But next we have the Grudge Song. Shunya is gone, but Meiko Kaji is still around, making this the last of the original quadrilogy. Shunya is replaced by director Yasuhiro Hasebe. His other directorial debuts include such distinguished titles as Rape, Rape the 13th Hour, and Raping. It doesn't take a genius to guess what's going to go on in this movie. By now, the formula is set. Scorpion is evading police capture, she's helped by a new character, this time a man who also has a grudge against the police, and then she gets involved with their story for a little bit. This time, things are a little bit more shameless, though. There's a lot more nudity and sex than previous outings, and this time it feels a lot cheaper than it had been before. For example, there's a handful of sex scenes in Beast Stable. That goes on between two characters, who are brother and sister, where the brother is mentally retarded. So it's not a scene that's meant to titillate the audience. If anything, it's meant to disgust them. Whereas in Grudge Song, the movie goes kind of out of its way to show tits at points. The unique visuals that the series is known for aren't completely absent. The last shot is gorgeous to look at, and is actually a great place for the series to end. But it's absent for the most part. Whereas Jailhouse 41 was mostly the surreal visuals, and some really bizarre landscapes that they had to go out of their way to find. This is more in line with Beast Stable, city and urban landscape. The tone, too, is probably a lot closer to Beast Stable, although it doesn't get quite as dark. Much like Beast Stable, the plot feels drawn out here. There's not really a lot happening, and it even retreads over the first movie a bit. If anything, it almost feels like a reboot. While there may be one or two neat things, this really isn't even a movie I'd recommend for fans of the first three. Grudge Song shows that the franchise was losing steam, and Meiko Kaji did not return for any future Scorpion movies. 3 years later, the series would have 2 new films starring a new Scorpion, and then another reboot attempt in 1991 and 2008. Maybe I'll review some of these someday, but it's not really a priority for me, and I'm pretty content where the series left me. One common theme between all 3 of them is the victimization of women. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a single redeemable male character. And while most women are hardly portrayed as saints, there's a strong undercurrent of rising up against this male oppression. And nowhere is this more apparent than the ending of the second movie. But I would never actually call these feminist movies, because there's enough rape in there to trigger any SJW, probably. I wouldn't call these feminist movies, because while they are about breaking the shackles of their oppressors, they're also sexually exploitive, which is an odd line that the series rides between exploitive schlock and art film. Of course, this female empowerment is exemplified perfectly in its lead character, the Scorpion herself. Naomi gets her shit done, and she doesn't bitch and moan about it. She's never saved by another stronger male figure. Of course, this wouldn't have nearly been as effective if it weren't for a very strong performance from Meiko Kaji, who would later go on to star in both Lady Snowblood movies. Without her as the Scorpion, the series wouldn't be anywhere near as memorable. She is definitely the standout from the films, and the reason why we have a franchise today. Overall, the series has more range than anyone would expect from a woman in prison franchise. But as far as it climbed out of the pit that it came from, the series sinks back in slowly. never quite reaching the depths that made its peers into flat-out exploitation movies, but never reaching the heights of legitimate cinema. If I were to rank the original 4, it would go 2, 1, 3, 4. Although I would still recommend the first 3 for anyone who wants to see an older side of Japanese cinema. Just be aware that while these movies deal with a serious subject matter, they don't necessarily handle it well all the time. And in a strange way, these movies don't seem like they are meant to be taken seriously, and that almost benefits the series. It has the skin of exploitation schlock, but there's just a bit more underneath.